Hi everyone, my name is Maria Hayden Hughes. Thank you very much for having me speak today at the Cofnod conference. I am very sorry that I cannot be there in person. However, I'll be speaking to you today about restoring a forgotten ecosystem, oyster restoration in North Wales. I am a marine scientist who has studied and worked in Wales for the past 10 years. I conduct research investigating environmental interactions and associated biodiversity and population dynamics for a range of commercial shellfish species. I currently assist with the delivery of research and innovation projects with local industry partners, investigating a range of topics from historical fisheries, disease prevalence, microplastics in shellfish, and this is within the Shellfish Centre, which is based in the School of Ocean Sciences in Bangor University. I also became local project officer in 2020 for the Welsh Restoration Hub in Conwy Bay for the Wild Oysters Project. So I educate and connect people with the sea by coordinating education and outreach sessions and events within the local community and schools, provide citizen science training and hands-on marine conservation experience as well. So here I am with my oysters in Conwy Marina. So when I say the word oyster, what first springs to your mind? So I would like to guess that many people are most familiar with oysters served in a restaurant, maybe with a glass of champagne, and this is because we have a long history of eating oysters. We've eaten oysters for thousands of years. There's evidence dating back to the Middle Ages. Of Romans in particular had a keen taste for native oyster, and records show that they used to eat them in their thousands at feasts. In the 19th century, more than 200 million native oysters were sold annually in London. And here is an illustration of Billingsgate Market, where you can buy oysters from the street. They were relatively cheap as well. You'd be able to buy 4 oysters for the equivalent price today of 1 pence. And so they weren't just food for the wealthy. Rather than on a dinner plate, in their natural environment underwater, oysters come to life. Capable of forming reef-like structures, they support biodiversity and contribute towards clean marine habitats. So here are some images of our native oyster under the water. They really do look amazing. There are over 40 different species of oyster found globally. In many places they're a source of food and money, as well as being a part of the local culture. So in the UK, in this top right image here, there is still an annual oyster festival where they crown the oyster king and queen. In Mozambique, women collect the oysters from the seashore, and it's a social activity, and they'll sell them at market. In other parts of the world, the oysters produce pearls, which are collected and used to make jewellery. In France, oysters are also considered a delicacy. In the UK, our native species is the European flat oyster. It has 2 shells, so one's curved and one's flat, and these are sort of rounded, rough, pale yellow, sort of green coloration with concentric bands. They're found in the shallow subtidal along the coasts, but also in estuaries as well. You may be familiar with this oyster. So this is the Pacific oyster, originally from Japan, which has an elongated shell with sharp curved edges and is a purple to pink colour. They're normally found in the intertidal shore, so you are more likely to see these if you're walking along the shore. They are now found around the UK and Ireland, but were originally introduced in the 60s to help support market demand for oysters when our native species was declining and we were very low on our fishery stocks. Here are the two species next to one another, so you can spot the differences there. In North Wales, we also have the bluff oyster, which is found in Chile and New Zealand. They look very similar to our European flat oyster, although the colour is a bit different, so dark tan to sort of the purpley grey with distinctive radiating rays as well. They were also brought over in the 60s to help support market demand for oysters. Oysters are filter feeders, so they draw seawater in over their gills, extracting out algae and detritus which they feed on, but also removing excess nutrients and sediment from the water. So in this time lapse, over a 4-hour period, you're able to see in the left tank shows the clarity of the water without the oysters inside, compared to the right tank showing the water being cleaned by the oysters. So I'll play that one again. Every adult oyster is capable of filtering around 200 litres of water per day, which is about a bathtub of water. So you can just imagine the huge quantity of water that could be cleaned by oyster reefs around our coast, and how brilliant an ecosystem it would be to help clean up our seas. As I mentioned previously, native oysters are reef forming, so they form oyster reefs, and these are the UK equivalent to a coral reef. So just like coral reefs, they provide lots of different habitats for a range of species, including commercial fish species, providing sort of nursery grounds, feeding grounds for their young. You also get a variety of sponges and seaweeds settling in amongst the oysters, as well as a variety of crabs, seahorses, a whole variety of life. Unfortunately, our European native oyster has faced population decline by 95% since the 1950s. This is due to disease, habitat loss and overexploitation. So in the UK, we just have a few remaining small populations which can be found on the west coast of Scotland, South Wales, Melford Swansea, and also in South England near in the Solent and the River Fell. So essentially the way oysters have been fished takes out the live oysters, but you're also removing the shelly substrate which the oyster larvae, so the oyster babies, settle on. So you're also removing that habitat as well. So this map on the right here, the orange areas show where there once was oyster reef habitat. So you can see that we used to have oysters all around the UK, in the English Channel, and also off Northern Europe there as well. So yeah, the area of oyster reef habitat that we've actually lost in the UK is the equivalent to the size of Wales. So why restore native oysters? So like I said, they improve water clarity and water quality, and they also increase fish production as well by providing habitat and feeding grounds and nursery grounds. You also increase the oyster populations. There's that cultural value. Oysters, as well as filtering and cleaning the water, they're able to denitrify, so remove any excess nutrients from the water, so to help avoid harmful algal blooms, or if you get sort of service runoff from the farms, they're able to extract those excess nutrients as well. And there are a whole range of people that benefit from having oyster reefs as well. So it supports the local economy, recreational fishers, also nature lovers as well. I'm sure we all would love to go scuba diving and or snorkeling over an oyster reef, hopefully in the future. So it supports coastal communities and also the marine industry as well. So how do you go about restoring oyster habitat? So the barriers to oyster restoration are firstly that there's a low number of mature reproducing oysters. So we need to get more adult oysters into our seas. There's also a lack of suitable habitat for the oyster larvae, so those oyster babies, to grow on. So oyster larvae are attracted to other oysters, oyster shell, shelly substrate. However, when you dredge for oysters, you don't just remove those adult oysters, you also remove the shell. So how you do this, you would deploy culch, which is the shelly mixed substrate, onto the seabed to provide that suitable habitat for the oyster larvae. Also, thirdly, oysters have been lost from living memory, so a lot of people don't remember having oysters in the local marine environment, or they don't know how important an ecosystem oyster reef habitat really is. So part of the project is also educating communities and reigniting that passion for the species. So the Wild Oysters Project is a partnership between the Zoological Society of London, the Blue Marine Foundation, which are both conservation charities, and also British Marine, which represents the UK marine industry. So the Wild Oysters Project has set up 3 restoration hubs around the UK, so one in the Firth of Clyde in Scotland, also Tyne and Wear in England, and Conwy Bay in Wales. And we set up these targets at the start of this 3-year project, and we're on track to achieve or exceed them all. And this includes installing 142 oyster nurseries. We've also observed oyster spawning. We plan to restore an area of the seabed in our Welsh and English sites next spring, summer, and we also are on track to exceed all of our engagement targets with local communities, school groups, and also training citizen scientists. There are 3 parts to the Wild Oysters Project. So at each restoration hub, we've installed oyster nurseries, which are these cage systems suspended below the marina pontoons, which hold mature adult native oysters, which will release their oyster larvae, so those oyster babies, back into the wider marine environment. We will also carry out a seabed restoration, which includes doing baseline surveys and deploying culch, which is this shelly substrate, onto the seabed where required to provide suitable habitat for the oyster larvae to settle on. Also, throughout the project, we have delivered an extensive public outreach and sciences education programme for both primary and secondary, all the way up to university students as well, in the form of classroom sessions, but also oyster safaris down at our marina sites. Why Conwy? Wales once had a prolific oyster fishery for the native oyster, which provided vital food source for the local coastal communities and also contributed to the Welsh economy. Locally to Conwy, there were productive native oyster beds during the 18th and 19th centuries in the Menai Strait, near Carnarvon, Bangor, also off Puffin Island and around Anglesey, as well as other areas in Wales as seen in this map on the right. Here are some oyster skiffs, which is a specific type of boat used traditionally to fish and dredge for the oysters. Although fishing for the native oysters in Wales had begun much earlier, native oyster shells have actually been discovered on the Great Orme, dating back to the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, so about 12,000 years ago. Unfortunately, only a few small native oyster populations remain in Wales, down in Milford Haven and Swansea. Conwy itself also has a long history of important shellfish production, with a lot of research carried out by the old fisheries experimental station that was based in Conwy. So here are some images below of the researchers that had trialled settling oyster larvae on these limed roof tiles, and had taken them out into the Menai Strait there to see whether they can help recover declining oyster stocks in the area. Also, Bangor University has also conducted a lot of research in Conwy, and all this information was really vital when determining the local ecology and suitability of the area for this native oyster restoration project. Our oyster nurseries are suspended below the pontoons in Conwy Marina and Conwy Marina. By having them suspended, they avoid predation by starfish from the seabed, And also it provides easy access, so I can bring down school groups and community groups, open the hatch, bring out the oysters, and they can see and learn all about them themselves. So it offers that sort of window into the sea. We conduct monthly monitoring of the oysters in the marinas. So here is some video footage from a monitoring day in Conwy Marina, and I've also included some photos from the monitoring session in Ganway Marina with the team from Cofnod. So you can see Roy, Aisling, Catherine, Jen, Tim and Richard all assisting me to conduct biodiversity surveys where we check what species are interacting with the oyster nurseries. And we also conducted oyster health checks as well. Our volunteers do not need any prior knowledge, so whether you are a marine biologist or would like to enjoy a day by the sea, everyone's welcome. To date, 65 different species have been identified across our Welsh, Scottish and English sites. Nearly 20,000 individuals have been counted through our monthly monitoring sessions in Conwy Marina and Ganway Marina. We've seen a whole variety of life, including the species pictured on this slide. So we've seen many different fish species, including different species of wrasse and blennies, also the rockling and 15-spine stickleback. We're also very excited to see quite regularly through the summer months the critically endangered European eel, which just shows what a great environment the Conwy River is. We get plenty of common prawns, also other shrimp species such as chameleon shrimp. We see a variety of crab species such as common shore crab, edible crab, and we also have seen the odd colourful nudibranch as well, including the sea lemon. This is some video footage of the oyster nurseries in our Scottish site in the Firth of Clyde. So you can see the shoals of fish used in the nurseries for food and shelter. So here's shoals of pollock and pouting here. So survival has been relatively high in our sites in Wales. So survival has been 73% in Conwy Marina and 67% in Ganway Marina. We've seen that the oysters have been growing and spawning. So these are all great signs that the oysters are settling and are happy in Conwy Bay. We did note a peak in the mortality post-spawning, so because the oysters exert so much energy and invest so much energy into developing their larvae and releasing their larvae in the summer months, if that coincides with an environmental stress such as an increase in water temperature, then you can find that sometimes you see this peak in mortality. Over the first year of the project, it's also estimated that the oysters have filtered 34 million litres of seawater in both the Conwy Marina and the Ganway Marina. It's a huge quantity of water. This summer we monitored oyster spawning, so the spawning season for the native oysters between June and September, when the seawater temperature goes above 16 degrees Celsius. So we used a non-destructive method, so rather than shucking the oysters and killing them, we sedated the oysters in a 5% magnesium chloride solution, which is to act as an anaesthetic. So the larvae is known as sick and changes in colour as it develops inside the adult. So it goes from white sick through to black sick, and then the adult will release the larvae. So we sedated the oysters so that the muscles that hold the shell tightly closed together actually relax and the shell opens up. So we were able to observe this larvae, and yeah, you can see what the larvae would look like under the microscope as well. So we've completed phase 1 of the project, which was to get adult oysters in the oyster nurseries in the marinas, and now we're working presently on phase 2 of the project, So that is restoring our reef sites. So we have carried out computer modelling and also baseline surveys, so seabed surveys of Conwy Estuary, and have been working closely with Natural Resources Wales to determine a suitable reef site where we will lay down our culch, so that sort of shelly material onto the seabed, which is the ideal habitat for the oyster larvae to settle on. So you can see this image below here. So this is the Australian flat oyster reef found in Tasmania, just as an example of the potential reefs that we could find here in North Wales. Thanks very much for listening. If you have any queries or if you'd like to get involved with the project, please contact me. My email is on this slide here. And for more information about the project, please feel free to visit our website, or you can find us on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the event.